everyone, this is Celine from Blue Calla Patterns. Welcome to video 5 for the Lunaria satchel. I'm going to assemble the lining of our bag in this video and then complete the final assembly. I'm going to also start by assembling the gusset lining. So I'm going to skip ahead. This is actually step 49 in the pattern. You'll need your 2 bottom pieces and your 2 side panel pieces. So it's hard to kind of tell them apart because they look very similar, but your 2 side panel pieces are not quite as long as the bottom pieces. So you're assembling this exactly as you did for the exterior. There's only one main difference that you need to be aware of. When you're sewing these 4 pieces together, I want you to use a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I know that seems like a lot, but the reason why is because compared to the exterior pieces, which have a stabilizer, they have the foam interfacing, there's really no stretch, there's no give to that. But when you're working with cotton that's interfaced, there's still a bit more stretch and movement to the fabric. So if we use a bigger seam allowance, then everything is really a lot more snug, and there's less movement. So we're going to start by clipping the shorter end, 2 shorter ends of the bottom pieces, and we're going to sew these together with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm also going to set up my iron because we're going to do a lot of pressing in these next steps. Okay, the 2 bottom pieces are sewn together. I'm just going to press that seam allowance open, and then I'll go back to the machine and I'll top stitch the seam allowance on both sides of that center seam. Okay, so I'm going to go and top stitch on both sides of the seam. Okay, so I've done the top stitching. Now I'm going to attach a side panel on this end. Then the other side panel on this end. And again, you're sewing these together with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, when these are sewn, you're going to flip these out and press the seam allowance towards the bottom and then top stitch that seam again. So you're going to do that on both sides. Okay, so the gusset is completely assembled and I can just set it aside for now. Now take one of your main body lining pieces and your 2 slip pocket pieces. Take this 2 slip pocket pieces and place them right sides together. Pin or clip along that top straight edge, and then you're going to go over to your machine and sew them together. Make sure you back stitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, I've sewn these together along the top straight edge. I'm going to start by pressing the seam allowance open. And then I flip them so that they are wrong sides together. Press that top seam flat. Then I'm going to go back to my machine and I'm going to top stitch this top edge. The top edge is top stitched. Now I'm going to place it over top of that main body lining piece. Just use a couple of clips to hold it in place. And then I'm just going to do a quick basting stitch all the way around to attach the pockets to the lining piece. Okay, so the pocket piece is basted on. It's probably hard to see the stitchings from the right side, so I'll show you from the wrong side. Now we're just going to fold this in half, and I want to use a pencil that I can erase. I'm just going to make a little mark at the top and bottom center of the pocket. And now I'm going to start sewing at the bottom, back stitch, and sew up towards that center mark here at the top, and make sure that I backstitch really well here to reinforce the opening of my pocket. Okay, so I now have two separate slip pockets. This panel is done and I can set it aside. Now you'll want to get your zipper pocket pieces. So you should have your 9-inch zipper, your zipper facing, your 2 zipper pocket lining pieces, and your remaining main body lining piece. I'm going to start by preparing and I'm sorry if I'm not following exactly the pattern, I'm kind of going in the sequence that my brain is thinking. I'm going to take the lining pieces and I'm going to fold the bottom edges up towards the wrong side, so wrong sides together, about 3/8 of an inch. It doesn't matter what you turn over at this point, as long as you turn over the same amount for both lining pieces. So if you find it easier to do 1/2 inch, do 1/2 inch. If 3/8 of an inch works for you, do that. I never measure, I just kind of make them look the same. Okay, now for one of these pieces, we're going to cut away 1 inch along that top edge that isn't folded. So this is the unfolded edge. Okay, so we're going to take this piece that we just cut along the top and we're going to place our zipper. Doesn't matter if your pull is to the left, to the right. And pins. We're going to pin this in place. And now we're going to sew the zipper to the lining piece. Now if you're using a pre-made zipper, it's going to be slightly shorter than the width here. That's okay. Just center it along that top straight edge. Also, if you've watched more than one of my videos, you'll see all of these steps are extremely repetitive. So if you feel like at this point you don't really need to watch me sew a zipper pocket for the 10th time, feel free to just skip this video entirely and finish your bag. Okay, so I'm going to go sew this 1/4 inch seam allowance along the top, and I'm going to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, this lining piece is attached to the zipper, and now we're just going to press it away from the zipper. So we're really repeating exactly the same steps as we did for the front exterior pockets. The only difference this time is that the bottom edges of our lining pieces are folded. This is the only difference. So I'm not going to show you attaching the second piece. It should be obvious to you how we are going to do this. So attach your second piece to the other side of the zipper, and then you can set aside your zipper pocket lining pieces for now. Okay, so my lining pieces are attached to my zipper. Now I'm going to take the interior zipper facing, and I'm repeating exactly the same steps as I did for the front exterior pockets. The only difference this time is my facing piece is longer. It's 11 inches wide, and I'm going to draw a rectangle on the wrong side that is 9 inches. And I'm using, usually it's 3/8 of an inch high, but because I'm using a number 5 zipper tape, I'm actually going to make my opening slightly taller. I'm going to make it 1/2 inch. But if you're using a standard dress size zipper, please draw a rectangle that is 3/8 of an inch high. Okay, now I'm just going to place this. I'm going to just, yeah, no, this is fine. Just going to pin this now, and I forget the distance from the top. One inch. It wasn't really that important. Okay, so 1 inch from the top edge, and you want it somewhat centered I never measure the center in this part. I just kind of eyeball it. Okay, so you're going to pin this in place, and you're doing again. This is a repetition of how we did the zipper facing on the front exterior of our bag. So you're going to sew all the way around the rectangle. You're going to draw a horizontal line through the center, and then the 4 diagonal lines that go from the center line to each of the 4 corners. You're going to cut out those lines that you just drew in the center. If you're forgetting how this is done, go back and refer to the video where we installed the front panel. I believe it's video 3. You're going to want to review that video if you've forgotten. And so you cut out those lines, you turn your facing in through towards the wrong side, and you press that opening, the rectangle opening for your zipper. I'm not going to redo that again another time. Just go back and review video 3 if you've forgotten how that's done. Okay, so I have the zipper pocket pieces here. You should have the shorter zipper pocket lining piece at the bottom. Normally I have my pull to the left, but I did things opposite this way. Then I have my lining piece with the facing installed, and I'm just going to place this over top, making sure that my zipper is centered in that opening. And then I want the edges of my facing piece to be lined up with the edges of my zipper pocket lining pieces here. I have a little thread. Okay, so now I'm just going to pin this in place, and as usual, I don't pin all the way around. I only pin the edges so that I can adjust the position of my zipper as I'm sewing to make sure that my zipper is perfectly centered in this rectangle opening. Okay, so I'm going to take this over to the machine, and I'm going to sew all the way around the rectangle opening, and I'm going to adjust my zipper as I'm sewing to make sure it's centered, and I sew around with about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now the zipper is sewn in place. I'm just going to flip this around, and you're going to take this top folded edge and you're going to fold it down to meet the other bottom folded edge. I'm just going to use some clips to hold this in place. And then you'll see it kind of bubbles here. I always just press it like this away from the zipper. This is a way of keeping your lining pieces from getting caught in the zipper. Now we're going to sew these together, and when I sew the lining pieces together, I'm only sewing here along the sides. I don't want to sew the bottom folded edges. I want to leave them open for turning my bag. So I usually sew with the main body panel facing up, and I flip it over so that I can see the facing in the 2 lining pieces. I start at the top here, so as close as I can get to that stitching around the rectangle opening. I back stitch and I sew down all the way to the bottom folded edges, and then I back stitch, and then I do the same for the other side. Okay, so while I was filming, unfortunately, I ran out of storage space, so some clips were not recorded as I would have liked. So the parts that are missing are step 50, where you're attaching your main body lining pieces to your assembled gusset lining. It's exactly the same as when you assemble those pieces for the exterior, with one big difference. And if you look at diagram 50 in your pattern, the only difference really is that when you're sewing a main body lining panel to your lining gusset, you start at the top corner with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then as you start sewing down the side, you increase to 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and you maintain that until you start getting close to the top corner at the opposite end, in which case you return to 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and you back stitch. So make sure you do that when you attach both of your main body lining panels to your lining gusset, and then trim your seam allowance before continuing. Okay, so I finished the lining, and before we continue, open up your interior zipper pocket all the way. This is very important. Then, and I know this is going to be tricky because this is bigger than this. The exterior shell is bigger than the lining shell, but you're going to insert this inside of your lining shell. And I like to put my zipper pocket at the back where I have my flap because it helps make turning of the bag slightly easier. That way there you can kind of pull your flap through first. Make sure that your rectangle rings at the sides are pointing downwards away from that top edge because we're going to be sewing there and we don't want to sew over our rectangle rings. So when we pin or clip this part, we always start by lining up the four side seams. It just looks nicer if they are nicely aligned, and that way there you know that your lining is going to fit nicely inside as well. Okay, so again, rectangle ring pointing down towards the bottom of the bag. If you're nervous about your zipper pulls getting in the way, you can actually just put them down a bit. Mine are pretty long and dangly, so I'm going to push those out of the way as well. Okay, and then once I've clipped together the four side seams, I'm going to clip everything else in between. You can see the bulk of the flap is kind of having trouble finding room inside the bag. Okay, but I'm going to stretch it out and I'm going to make it fit. It's kind of good if it's nice and snug at the top because then you won't have any puckers as well at the top edge where your lining is. Okay, almost done. Just need to do the front of the bag. Okay, so now I'm going to sew these together along this top edge. And then if you want to make it nice and strong, you can actually sew twice. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the machine and I'm going to sew these together. Okay, so the top edges are sewn together. Now you get to watch me wrestle this out. So, like I said, pull the flap out first through that zipper pocket. And then usually grab one corner, pull out the one corner first. So this is the gusset part that I'm pulling out now. And then the other corner. Okay, and you want to tuck everything inside your bag. Now if you want, you can press that top edge before you top stitch. Okay, so just, you can top stitch, or what I like to do is I just kind of finger press that top seam and then I add clips all the way around, and then I go over to my machine and I top stitch. I don't know if you could see this maybe a little bit better. So just finger press, add a clip, and then I do that all the way around and then I top stitch. Okay, so I've top stitched the top edge of my bag. The only thing you have left to do now is, aside from the adjustable strap, is to sew the bottom of your zipper pocket together. So you just pull it up, and since it's already folded inwards, it's very fast to do. You can either sew it closed by hand, or you can sew it shut with your sewing machine. And what I try to do is just, I do always use my machine because I'm terrible at hand sewing. And then I sew as close as I can get to the edge, and then just tuck it back in, and your bag is done, minus your adjustable strap. Now, I'm not going to cover sewing the adjustable strap because this is something I've done many, many times. I will, however, include in the description 2 links, one to make the version that I'm going to be making with the vinyl. So that will be video 5 of the Baronia bowler bag video series. So you'll find that link in the description below. If you're making a fabric strap, I believe I made one for the, the sweet pea tutorial, perhaps another one, but I will also include a link to an existing video for a fabric adjustable strap in the description below. And that's it. I'm just going to stuff my bag and give it a good press, and we're done.